Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Between Monsters and Men. Today we'll be unveiling the mystery of Ephraim Gray, the Immortal Man. Ephraim Gray, or some say Ephraim Graves, was an antisocial man to the point he hired a manservant to deal with any outings that needed dealt with, such as grocery shopping and communicating with the outside world. Nobody is exactly sure when he came to live in Malden, Massachusetts, or even if he was born there, but his story derives within the early to middle 1800s. He was a highly intelligent man, his passion revolving around chemistry, which he self-taught himself, but he was so reclusive that he had no noticeable interest in the ladies and focused solely on his studies. Others said that he was unpleasant and rude, and that he didn't have a job or career, yet he had a great sum of money to the point he was able to pay for a servant. Due to his lack of communication with the world, he never married, and from what anyone could tell, he also didn't have any family. As per usual with a mysterious man in a mysterious house, residents would often wander by his old creepy-looking house in hopes to take a glimpse at Mr. Gray and his odd activities, but what they saw beyond the windows were shadowy figures that looked goblin in shape. What was worse was the smell, an odor so terrible emitted from the house that traveler buyers would gag and choke. When being asked what Mr. Gray was doing, the servant replied that Ephraim spent most of his life developing an elixir that would guarantee his immortality. Ephraim Gray remained closed in his house for years until his very death in 1850 to 1860. When he passed, his male servant reported to the Malden Police Department that his master died in his sleep. With no family of his own, Mr. Gray let everything to his servant, including his estate, all his belongings, and even the secret formula he had been working on. However, this would only be possible if he could keep to one condition: that Mr. Gray's body after death was never embalmed, autopsied, dissected, or anything else following the death of a person. When the mortician asked the servant why such an odd request, the servant replied, Mr. Gray was an odd man, and though he failed to make himself immortal, the formula he created would leave his body perfectly preserved. And so Mr. Gray's corpse was transported immediately to the Malden cemetery with no stops. He was placed in a mausoleum in a nice above-ground coffin. Unfortunately, the servant didn't get to enjoy the fortunes of his master's leftovers because he died soon after as well. 20 years later, rumors of Mr. Gray's preservation practice reached the ears of a group of Harvard medical students. In secret, they ventured to the Malden cemetery to examine Mr. Gray's body in order to put to rest the rumors of his perfectly preserved body. However, when they opened his tomb, they found that no trace of rot or death has touched Ephraim's body. Stunned, the students resealed the coffin and left. One version of the story states that one of the medical students brought a saw and cut off Ephraim's head, but something frightened him and he ran off with the others, leaving the body and the head behind. In the early 1900s, the Malden cemetery was relocated due to construction of newly built roads. This required moving the tombs and graves as well, and when they came to the tomb of Ephraim Gray, they noticed that his coffin was lighter than normal. Unsealing the tomb, they found that his body was missing. Rumors quickly spread from Ephraim waking from his sleep and leaving his resting place, to rumors that the medical students or grave robbers stole his body. After word of the body having gone missing, the Harvard students, now in their middle ages, came out about their secret visit to Mr. Gray's grave and told of how well preserved his body was and how they made sure to reseal the tomb and left without taking anything. Next to the body having never been found, neither had the formula that he had created and drank for majority of his life until his death. New England folklorist Edward Rowe Snow, who's also an author and student from Harvard University himself, was the one who made claim that the medical students removed the corpse's head. After the removal, they heard moans and phantom footsteps within the tomb, which frightened them. They abandoned the body and fled. Mr. Snow also wrote, it became known that in the night, at the stroke of 12, the iron tomb would fly open. Indeed, few Malden residents dared to be caught there to see the fearful thing. The tomb door would swing ajar. Then the horrific, gruesome remains of Ephraim in the mildewed garments would crawl out of the coffin. Pulling itself up by the door ledge, it began to stalk around the cemetery as if in search of its head. At the first sign of daylight, it went back to rest. It is not at all strange for a doctor or scientist to be interested in preservation of the dead and immortality. The ancient Egyptians experimented with this idea for centuries before Mr. Gray and even before majority of civilization had considered the idea fully. There are a few cases of bodies being preserved since the day they had passed. Rosalia, the 2-year-old sleeping beauty of Palermo, died in 1920, which National Geographic released information on the secret formula that was used on her back in 2009, which will be linked in the below if you want to read it. And Bernadette Suberus of Lourdes, France, who died in 1876 and is well preserved today. The way the body is preserved can determine the quickness of decay, from staying underwater, underground, in the sun, in the cement, etc. However, if Ephraim Gray was real, where did he disappear to? Did the Harvard students steal the body to dissect? Did grave robbers steal his body? Did the formula truly work but took years to activate and now he walks the earth? No one truly knows. I could not find any records on Ephraim Gray or graves in the births, marriages, and deaths in the town of Malden, Massachusetts from 1649 to 1850. I saved the exact link of the page that would obtain such information down in the description below. This doesn't mean that he didn't exist, since the year ended in 1850 and with him he could have died between 1850 and 1860. However, when looking into Malden, Massachusetts cemeteries, I found 4 cemeteries and none had the name Ephraim Gray or Ephraim Graves in their records. I couldn't find pictures of the tomb either, which I would assume that if it did exist, paranormal investigators or local curious folks would be snapping pictures of the local legend. And there is claim that after having not found the body, they kept the mausoleum and tomb. So I dug a little deeper. I wanted to do the best research I could from where I sit. I looked into each cemetery and their history that I could find, and here is what I found. All 4 cemeteries are within Malden, Massachusetts. Holy Cross Cemetery, which was established in 2010. Forestdale Cemetery, that was dedicated on May 30th, 1885, and designed in 1884. Maplewood Cemetery was founded in 1851. And St. Mary Cemetery, which is the earliest records I could find on this cemetery, was in 1864. Anything significant here? All the cemeteries were built or designed after Ephraim's death. I'm not saying there are not others much smaller and less heard of cemeteries in Malden. Those 4 were the only ones I could find online. From what I could find and sum it up to, Ephraim didn't exist. There are no records of him living or dying in Malden. There are no pictures of his apparent house, tomb, or death certificates. And there were very few websites containing any information of the story and few books that would pop up for me. So maybe he is just a legend to scare around a campfire. Maybe a Harvard story to help improve the smaller communities at the time. Who knows? I don't believe he existed. He is much like Dr. Benton's story, who was also another little scary story to college students told the newcomers, which was my very first video on this channel. So, what do you think? Due to YouTube demonetizing videos like mine, please check out my Patreon page to help support me if you'd like. I do videos on the bizarre, creepy, dark, and mysterious. I'd like to thank my supporting Patreon this far. If you like the creepy and bizarre, please like, comment, and subscribe.